John, and moving forward here a little bit, I think. Uh, we're in John chapter 7. We got through John 6, and which is a really difficult chapter. In John 7, we really get into this dialogue. And we're not going to have another miracle now until John 9. There were 7 miracles in John. We've talked about that. The water into wine. We talked about, of course, the first miracle, and we've been through that. The healing the official's son, the nobleman's son, he healed from a distance. The lame man at the pool of Bethesda, John chapter 5. Feeding the multitude, John chapter 6. Walking on water, John chapter 6. And then we only got 2 more miracles in this gospel, and we're a little ways from them. In John 9, we have the healing of the blind man, born blind from birth. Probably one of the longest narratives of a miracle in the entire Bible. John 9, blind from birth. And then we have raising Lazarus, which of course is a huge miracle and only recorded in John's gospel. And John 11, and that of course is really close to the crucifixion. So we've been through some of these miracles. We have a couple to go. All the miracles in John, I think, really had significance because he only has 7. A lot of things, like I said, we don't see in John, right? You've probably noticed that, I hope, as we've read through this. There's no demon possessions here. No demon possessions in John. No parables in John. So a little bit different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Quite a bit different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So it's a kind of a different narrative. And as we get into 7, and you're probably going to find 7 a little dry, you know, in a way. I mean, 7's a lot of narrative, and 8's a lot of narrative before we get to 9. So there's a lot of narrative, a lot of words of Jesus in here, and a lot of these things that he is going to, it's just this kind of intern part, but it's all has to do with the deity of Jesus. And we started in 7 last week, and about his brothers don't believe in him. His brothers wanted him to go. This is the Feast of Booths. So this is in the fall of the year. This is what they call the Feast of Harvest sometimes. So this is in the fall. So it's when the harvest comes in from the fields. It's this time of year we're in right now, maybe a little past this time of year. And they put booths on top of their roofs, and they would have this Feast of Booths, Feast of Harvest. So they would, that's why it's called booths, because they put these booths on top of their roofs, and they had this feast. So, and it's a big thing, another big Jewish holiday. Everybody's going to Jerusalem. So Jesus, they're saying, go up there. His brothers don't believe in him, but his brothers are like, go and do your signs in Jerusalem, right? Go and do what you do in Jerusalem so that people can see it. No one does anything in secret when he seeks to be known publicly. Show yourself to the world, for even his brothers were not believing in him, John says. So they're looking for this proof too, right? This evidence too. But of course, Jesus, as we talked about last time, Jesus is going to sneak into Jerusalem, right? He's going to go in. He's going to go up privately, right, by himself. So his apostles aren't with him. We don't know what they're doing at this particular time. The Jews are looking for him because they know what's going on. Where is he, right? We want to find him. Who is he? He's a good man. He leads people astray. No one was speaking openly for fear of the Jews. So it's a really interesting time, right? Who is this guy? What is this guy? What's he doing? What's he up to? Is he good? Is he bad? Is he the one we're looking for? Is he not the one we're looking for? They're talking, right? There's a lot of gossip going on here, a lot of things going on. They're looking for him, right? They can't find him. They expect to see him. So there's a lot going on here at this particular time. But when it was in the midst of the feast, so it'd be probably middle of the week, Jesus went up to the temple and he began to teach. They were astonished, right, as they often are, uneducated, right? Galilean, uneducated. Jesus said, it's not my teaching, it's he who sent me. If anyone's going to do his will, he would know the teaching, whether it's from God or whether I speak for myself. So, Jesus, once again, Jesus is teaching. They're astonished by his words, as we often see in the Bible. And so he's letting them, he's kind of revealing himself to them. But then he begins to really point to God. And I think that's one thing we see in Jesus' words in John's gospel, is Jesus is always pointing towards God in the Gospel of John. It's not my words, it's he who sent me, right? Billy brought up that idea, that Jesus makes that separation, right? And we really need to see that. We say Jesus and God are one, but Jesus himself makes that separation, doesn't he? He says, my Father. He refers to his Father in another sense as my Father, not as me. But he also says that it's his glory, right? The glory of the one who sent him. He is true. There's no unrighteous. Moses gave you the law, and yet none of you carries out the law. Why do you seek to kill me? It's kind of a generic statement. I mean, they did keep the law to a large extent. They didn't keep all of it. They never kept all of it, ever. But they kept a lot of it. Certain things they were a lot more worried about than others, I guess, kind of like we all are, right? The parts of the law that were maybe a little easier to keep, they kept. Some of it they didn't. Jesus accuses them of that. He says, why do you want to kill me? And he says, you have a demon. Who seeks to kill you? So, they're kind of questioning, like, oh, well, it's not us, right? We're not the ones. You have a demon, right? In other words, nobody's out to kill you. You're imagining that. You have a demon. You're thinking that for yourself. But, of course, a lot of them did want to kill him, right? Jesus is kind of looking at the select few here, I think. A lot of Jews lived really good lives, I'm sure, and still Jews probably try to live really good lives under Judaism. And I'm sure that Jews in this time, I'm sure there were very sincere followers of God in the time of Jesus. I'm sure there were. There had to be. People who really tried to do what God wanted them to do, people who really tried to keep the law. But, Jesus really, in these conversations, he's really looking at those who held themselves up to be the ones that kept it, isn't he? The ones that really held themselves up and said, look at us, look how good we are. Boy, we're at the pinnacle. Look how good we do. And those are the ones that Jesus really criticized. Not those that were humble, those that knew they didn't. Jesus was never after those people. But you got to remember, these priests, these scribes, they prided themselves on being perfect, right? On perfectly keeping the law, looking good, dressing right, acting right, keeping the law, I'm doing it all right. And Jesus is saying, no, you're not, right? You're not doing it. So, I think Jesus is really looking towards those people, especially when he's in the temple here. He says, but then he gives them kind of an illustration here. And it's one of those things that's a conflict of law. Law is always often conflict, don't they? Even in our society, we have laws that conflict other laws. We will break a law to keep a law, right? And so that's something that happens in all law because of just how law is. And this is a case of that. And it's something that Jesus is going really to talk to them about, because he just accused them of not keeping the law, right? He just accused them. He says, you don't keep the law. Well, so now he brings up this parallel. He says, Moses gave you circumcision, and on the Sabbath you circumcise a man. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses will not be broken, are you angry with me because I made an entire man well on the Sabbath? So this deed that Jesus is talking about, it's about healing someone. And we don't know if it was the man at the pool of Bethesda, possibly, I would think, because that was in John's gospel. We don't know if it's another healing. We don't know. But it was on the Sabbath. And if you remember, the healing at the pool of Bethesda, that was on the Sabbath. So maybe we're talking about that particular event. Jesus healed other people on the Sabbath, but maybe we're talking about that event. But Jesus basically says, listen, you break a law to keep a law. Moses said, or Abraham, when circumcision came down from Abraham, And it's interesting here because he says, for this reason Moses has given you circumcision. Which Moses really didn't bring circumcision. That was Abraham, right? That really, circumcision started with Abraham, right? But Moses brought the law. So essentially, it's the same thing. Moses gave you circumcision. So according to Jewish law, right, a boy was supposed to be circumcised on what day? 8th day. Well, you know, 8th day could fall on a Saturday, right, which would be the Sabbath. So then you have a conundrum, don't you? On one hand, you're commanded to circumcise on the 8th day. On the other hand, you're commanded not to work on the 8th day. So which law is more important, right? Which law is more important? Well, obviously, from what Jesus says, they took circumcision to be more important than keeping the Sabbath, right? Because apparently if it was the 8th day, they would do the circumcision. Jesus says, since you do that, right, since you're okay with that, then why are you upset because I made an entire man well on the Sabbath, right? He says, do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. Now, why does he say that? Do not judge according to appearance. Because if we just see something happen and judge it, we could be wrong because we don't know all the facts. Am I right? It'd be like seeing somebody standing above a body with a bloody knife, and you say, well, he killed him. Well, maybe he just walked up and picked up the knife, right? I mean, we don't know, right? You don't know, right? If you're judging according to appearance, it's what you see. You make a judgment, right? You make a snap judgment. We do that all the time in our lives. We do that. I do that. You do that. We all do that. We make a snap judgment. We see something and we judge it, right? Jesus says, don't do that. Don't judge according to appearance because you don't know the facts. You don't know the whole story. You don't know what's going on. If you circumcise, then you're saying, well, that law is more important than the Sabbath law. Well, maybe, but you can't keep both, right? You can't keep both. So somebody looking from the outside that didn't know Judaism would say, oh, well, you're breaking the law. You're circumcised on the Sabbath. But then they might not understand that, well, that's another law of God, then you need to keep that law of God. Jesus says, if I heal on the Sabbath, he says, you don't always keep the Sabbath. There's exceptions. You don't know the whole story. So why do you do that? Don't judge righteously, right? Judge righteously. Don't judge according to appearance. And then is this not him? He's speaking publicly. They're saying nothing. The rulers do not really know that this is the Christ, do they? So, did they know? I don't know. Maybe not, right? Maybe not. Maybe they didn't really know it was him. Maybe they were scared of the crowd. Maybe, I don't know. Aren't this the one they're seeking to kill? You know, it's funny, they just said they weren't seeking to kill him, but the people seem to think they're seeking to kill him, don't they? And so he says that. So they say, is this the guy? Why aren't they doing anything? Do they not know this is the Christ? Do they really not know this is the Christ? Maybe not. I don't know. It's an interesting time. It says, we know where this man is from, but whenever the Christ may come, no one knows where he is from. That's not really true. It's not really a true statement because they know from the Old Testament, they know from Micah he'll be born in Bethlehem. Now it says that he'll be called a Nazarene. There's nowhere in the Old Testament it says that, but they do know he's from Bethlehem. We don't know where he's from. So what do they mean? Like where he's physically from or where he's spiritually from? See, I don't know. See, he says, I'm from God. I come from God. Well, that's confusing to them. Come from heaven. Jesus cried out, saying, you both know me and know where I am from. I've not come of myself, but he who sent me is true, whom you do not know. I know him because I am from him, and he sent me. Now, if you really look at this, I know it gets confusing. It almost seems like Jesus is talking in a circle. But the truth is that John really puts this in here because John's really still pointing to the deity of Christ, to his deity. And over and over, John's going to bring this up. I'm from God. I'm from the Father. I represent the glory of the Father. I do what the Father tells me to do. Over and over and over, we see this in John, because John's always putting Jesus and God in the same grouping. He's always pointing towards this deity. And Jesus says, he sent me, right? They're seeking to seize him, that they didn't because his hour had not yet come. Many believed in him. And then he says, when the Christ comes, will he not perform more signs than those which this man has? Will he? He will not perform more signs. In other words, Jesus is doing so much that even the crowd's saying, surely nobody else can do more than this, right? This has got to be him. This has got to be him. You can almost see the confusion, can't you? Is this him? Is this not him? You know, where are you from? Well, I'm from Bethlehem. I'm from Galilee, but that's not what they're meaning here. Where are you really from? Where did you come from? Well, I came from God. I came from the one who sent me. Boy, that's blaspheme to Judaism, right? So it's really a confusing statement, and it almost seems like we're in a circle, talking in a circle here, but we're not. Jesus is continually, and John's continually showing him pointing towards God. The Pharisees heard the crowd muttering. They sent officers to seize him. Jesus said, for a little while I am with you, then I go to him who sent me. You will seek me, you will not find me. Where I am, you cannot come. And the Jews said to one another, where does this man intend to go? We'll not find him. Is he intending to go to the dispersion among the Greeks and teach the Greeks, is he? In other words, it doesn't make any sense. This doesn't make any sense. Where's he going to go that we can't find him? Where's he going to go that we don't know where he is? He's not going to the Greeks, is he? Is he going to the Greeks? They're confused. We would have been confused, right? We would have been confused by this. This wouldn't have made sense to us at all. None of this would have made sense. Makes sense in hindsight, but at the time Jesus was saying it, we would have been scratching our heads. What's this guy talking about, right? Where's he going to go that I can't find him, right? Doesn't make any sense. So it's very confusing to them. It's confusing almost to us. You will seek me, you will not find me. Where I am, you cannot come. Now this feast had a water festival in it, and every day they would do these like water parade things. So water was a big part of this feast. And so because they were wanting water, and it was part of that kind of appeasing God, and it didn't originally start in this feast, but it came into existence. So every day they would have this like water parade. And so water was a big part of this deal. And because of that, he gets into this thirst. Now, if you remember right, you know, John really fixates on this idea of water, doesn't he? The woman at the well, right? I'll give you this living water. He gives this idea of unless you drink my blood in John 6, right? This idea of thirst, of nourishment. And once again, now we're in this water festival thing, and he brings this up, right? If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture said, from this innermost being will flow rivers of living water. But this he spoke of the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive, for the Spirit was not yet given, because Jesus was not yet glorified. So he really ties this water into it, and he does that in John, not the only idea of water, but the idea of living water, the idea of water you'll never thirst again, water that flows from inside of us, water that, this idea of nourishment. Water's life, right? Water is life. And, you know, when we look at that deal, it almost reminds you in the Old Testament when they were wandering in the wilderness. It was always water, wasn't it? Did you bring us out here, right, so we don't have anything to drink? Water, water, water. Remember that? As they were wandering in the wilderness, and Moses got in trouble for striking the rock at Meribah. But before that, water flew from the rock. So water was a big thing. And water's life, and water's important. And Jesus brings this up. I'm living water. Drink of me, you'll never thirst again. So there's a lot of stuff, a lot of parallels going on here. And the question in their mind still remains, who is this guy? Right? Who is this guy? I mean, he performs these signs, he performs these miracles, but he doesn't really look like what we thought he'd look like. He doesn't really seem to be the guy we thought he would be. Surely this has got to be him, doesn't it? Surely this has got to be him. Look at everything he does. But, well, you know, he's not really doing what we thought he'd do, right? Doesn't really look like we thought he'd look. I don't know. You think this is him? Well, I don't know, right? Jesus asked him the question, didn't he, in Matthew? Who do people say that I am? Who do they say that I am? Well, some say Elijah, right? Or one of the prophets, right? In other words, they didn't know who he was yet. Didn't know. Kind of confusing. Any comments? Some of the people said, certainly this is the prophet. And that's a definite article. And you'll see prophet is capitalized in the text. So that's something that they're saying this is that prophet, which would be the Christ. Okay? He is the prophet. Peter says that in Acts. He says that prophet, definite article. And that's why that's capitalized, because it's looking towards Christ as definite article in the Greek. Others were saying, this is the Christ. Still others saying, surely the Christ is not going to come from Galilee, is he? Has not the scripture said Christ comes from the descendants of David and from Bethlehem, the village where David was? So a division occurred in the crowd because of him. Some of them wanted to seize him, but no one laid hands on him. So it's confusing. He's supposed to come from Bethlehem. Well, the Bible said from Bethlehem he would come. That's what Micah 5:2 says. Oh, Bethlehem, afraid you're least alone the clans of Judah. You know, someone from great will come from you, you know. Come from Bethlehem. But he didn't come from Bethlehem, did he? Well, he was born in Bethlehem, so I guess he did. But he didn't really live in Bethlehem. Did they know he was born in Bethlehem? Do you think? I don't think they knew, right? I don't think they knew where he was born. So they didn't really understand that, right? So to them, he came from Galilee. Well, Bethlehem's not in Galilee. Bethlehem's in Judea. So that wouldn't make sense. They didn't know he was born in Bethlehem. But he come from Nazareth. He come from Galilee. Can that be him? Well, I don't know. If you don't know all the facts, right? If you don't know where he was born, I don't know. Can that be him? Well, he does a lot of signs, right? So what do you do with him? Well, nobody seems to know. So they went to seize him, but they didn't bring him back. And they said, why didn't you bring him back? You know what's interesting, if you go back, what we read in this text, it says he cried out. If you think of somebody crying out, what would you think? I mean, you think that would be pretty loud? If someone cries out? I mean, that's kind of the text, isn't it? I mean, so he was pretty vocal, wasn't he? I mean, he cried out. I always think about that, right? So they knew this is the guy, right? This is the one we need to seize. This is the man. This is the one we need to get. And yet when they come and they go to get him, they don't bring him back. And they say, why? Why didn't he bring him? And he says, never has a man spoken the way this man speaks. And the Pharisees said, you have not also been led astray, have you? No one of the rulers of the Pharisees has believed in him, has he? Which is probably not true. Because I really think Nicodemus, by this time, did believe in him. But that's not something they're going to say. They're going to use the absolute. We haven't. In other words, we're the leaders. We're the ones who should know. We haven't. But the crowd which does not know the law, this crowd which does not know the law is accursed. The law of Moses is accursed. So they went to get him, but he was speaking, right? Maybe they didn't want to barge in the crowd. Maybe they were afraid of the crowd. Maybe they were really impressed by what Jesus said. Either way, they didn't bring him back. So even though they went to get him, they went to lay hold of him, they didn't bring him back. They said, why didn't you bring him back? Because no one's ever spoke like that. And the ruler said, well, look at us, we should know. We don't believe in him, do we? But on the other hand, the crowd, now they accuse the crowd of just being ignorant, right? That crowd's ignorant. They don't know. Otherwise, they would be on our side, but they just don't know. They're just ignorant. So, but Nicodemus, Nicodemus, I think, believes in Jesus. I think that's why John brought him up, right? In John chapter 3, that's why we had Nicodemus coming to Jesus by night, right? Nicodemus is going to be, when Jesus crucified, Nicodemus is going to be there to help take Jesus down from the cross. Nicodemus, I think, believes in Jesus. I think always has. And Nicodemus said, our law does not judge a man unless it first hears from him and knows what he is doing. And they answered, you are not also from Galilee, are you? Search and see, no prophet arises out of Galilee. So, this Galilee thing's a big thing. Y'all get that? The Galilee thing's a big thing, right? It's like me. I graduated from Graham. It's like, well, nobody good ever graduated from Graham, right? So it's kind of them things. Kind of gives you stigmatism, right? So anyway, this Galilee thing's a really big thing. Galileans are looked down upon, frowned upon. They're the working people. They're not as wealthy. It's not a really affluent part of the world. They're not educated. It's everything about it is, oh, nothing good comes out of Galilee. Nothing good comes out of Galilee. And yet that's exactly where Jesus came from. And that's a real sticking point with them. They really don't believe that. But once again, I don't know they know the whole story either. If you look at 53 is the start of this. Crap, I got to go back. Hold on. 53 is the start of this. Everyone went to tell me. I want you to look at the bracket at the beginning of 53 right there. Do you see that bracket at the beginning of 53? Right here. Bracket at the beginning of 53. I want you to keep that in mind because you're going to get upset with me in a minute. So I want you to know this is where it starts before you get upset with me. So when you go into 8, 8 has one of our big textual variants, doesn't it? It's a story we love. It's a story that's had 1 million sermons preached about it. I never use it because it's a variant. It's the woman caught in adultery. Not in the earliest manuscripts. And if you really look at, the reason I want you to look at the flow of the text. So let's go back a little bit. And let's see where we're at here, right here. Our law does not judge man. Okay, but listen to 52. They answered him, you're not also Galilee, are you? Search and see that no prophet arises out of Galilee. Now remember, take the chapter and verse breaks out of this, because remember, they didn't exist, the original text, right? So chapters and verses never existed in the original document, original text. There was no chapter 7, chapter 8, verse 4, whatever. There was no chapter, no verses. This is just a letter, right? This is just a scroll, right? So if you're writing a letter to someone, your letter should flow. What I mean by that is you'll go from paragraph to paragraph to paragraph, but your thought you're not going to, it's not like talking to somebody like me, because y'all know me and we could be talking about something and then I'll be talking about something else, right? And because if you know me, you know that's how I am. But when you write your letter, the thought should flow. Am I right? The thought should flow. So think of what it says at the end of this chapter right here. No, we're right here? No, he says you're judging him, but you've never heard him. And under the law of Moses, you had a chance to defend yourself.
Right, but when he told him to search, is he not saying go look and see where he's supposed to come from?
Well, yeah, no one comes out of Galilee. Search the scriptures, no one comes out of Galilee. Yeah. Right. But that,
trying to disprove it.
right, because I don't think most of them knew that he was actually born in Bethlehem. You know what I mean? So, I think they didn't really think, well, he's really from Bethlehem, right? It'd be like if you knew me, you'd say, well, I'm from Henrietta, but, I was born in Grand Junction, Colorado. So, unless you know me pretty well, well, you probably know because most of y'all know me pretty well, but if you, unless you knew me, you would know that, right? But if you look at the end of this, he says, you're not from Galilee, are you? Search no prophet arises out of Galilee. Now I'm going to skip through the first part of 8. And then Jesus spoke to them and says, I am the light of the world. He who follows not walk in the darkness. So the Pharisees said to him, I wish I had a different background on that, I'm sorry. You are testifying about yourself. The testimony is not true. This is the flow of the thing. Jesus spoke to them, I am the light of the world. He who follows me not walk in darkness. So Jesus is arguing this point. You haven't come out of Galilee. Nobody's come out of Galilee. And then Jesus keeps arguing this point. So why would he have this in the middle, right? Jesus went out to the Mount of Olives. There was no indication that Jesus went anywhere. Jesus is at the Feast of Booths. Jesus is in the Temple of Jerusalem. Jesus is having a conversation with these people. And then all of a sudden, he's at the Mount of Olives. You see, it doesn't fit the flow of the text. Does that make any sense? Why did we jump him to the Mount of Olives all of a sudden? You know, we're in the temple. We're still in the temple after this. After this, we're still talking to the Jews. Jesus spoke to them. I am the light of the world. We're still having the conversation with the Pharisees. We're still having the conversation, but all of a sudden we put this right in the middle, right? Doesn't make any sense. So it's a variant. It's not in the oldest document. So people say, well, did it really happen? Well, I don't know. Maybe. Maybe it did. I don't know. It's not recorded in any other gospel. It could be. There's oral things that were handed down that Jesus did. Some scribe might have put that in there at some point down the road. But we have some really, really old texts, really, really old codexes of John's gospel, and none of them contain this. So it was added at some point later on by somebody. Could have happened, could have been a real thing, but I don't know. We love it. It's a great story. Woman caught in adultery, Jesus riding on the ground, where are your accusers? We all know this story, but wasn't in the original document. So anyway, it's one of the big variants in the Bible. This one and the end of Luke are really the big ones that aren't there, but this one always gets people because people really love this story. So, and it could have happened. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. But we just don't think if it happened, we don't think it happened right here. So in this particular place. So because it doesn't fit in with the rest of it doesn't fit in. We're still in the temple. We're still having this conversation. I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, will have the light of life. The Pharisee said to him, it says, you are testifying about yourself. Your testimony is not true. That is really a law of Moses thing. In other words, you know, if you had to have somebody else to testify about you, 2 or 3 witnesses. If you remember, if you go back to what it says, Nicodemus said, right? He says, you haven't heard from him. In other words, he has a chance to defend himself. That's what flows into this. Jesus defending himself. But then they say, okay, but you're testifying about yourself, right? And you can't testify about yourself. You need to have witnesses. You need to have somebody else to testify. Because Moses said that you had to condemn people or make them righteous on 2 or 3 witnesses. In other words, you had to have somebody else. That's the argument. And Jesus said, I testify about myself. My testimony is true, for I know where I came from and where I am going. But you do not know where I come from or where I am going. You judge according to the flesh. I am not judging anyone, but even if I do judge, my judgment is true, for I am not alone in it, but I and the Father who sent me. So now he gets to the crux of it. He says, I'm not alone because the Father who sent me and I both testify of me. And they say, well, how does the Father testify of you? Right? God can't speak for him. But he says, but the point is, he says, the Father will testify about me because of the things that I do that are from God. In other words, the very works that I do testify about me, plus I testify about me. So there is 2 things that testify. Because I couldn't do these works. No man could do these works but me. But God, right? God's the only person who can do these works. So the works testify about me. So there are 2 things that testify about me. I testify about me, and the works I do testify about me. So I'm from God. In other words, you see, I am that person. I am him. Even in your law, and I think it's interesting, he says your law. And law is not capitalized here, which means he's not talking about the law of Moses. So he says, even in your law, he says, it has been written that the testimony of two men is true. Right? Two men. He says, I am he who testifies about myself, and the Father who sent me testifies about me. So there is two. But then they ask the question you and I would ask, right? What will you and I would ask? They say, where is your Father? In other words, if your Father's testifying about you, then where is your Father? What are you talking about? Where's the other guy? Where's your other testimony? And so Jesus tells them, he says, you don't know me, nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father. Man, that's so John. Because Jesus continually, even in John 14, when Philip says, show us the Father, and that's enough for us. And Jesus says to Philip, he says, have I been with you so long, and yet you do not know the Father? Don't you know that I'm in the Father, and the Father is in me? You know, John's going to bring this up repeatedly, this idea that I've seen you, I'm the representation. The Hebrew writer says he's his exact representation of God. Paul says, he says the same thing, right? He says he's a representation of God. So Jesus is saying that. He says he spoke in the treasury. The treasury is at the beginning part of the temple. It's not really in the temple. It's where the widow's mite was. It's where you go in. It's not inside. It's like the foyer. Okay? So he's not actually in the temple. He's in the treasury, which is where they put their money when they went in. It says he spoke in the treasury, but then he went in the temple, right? No one seized him. His hour had not yet come. I go away, you will seek me, you will die in your sin. Where I am going, you cannot come. That's an absolute. You cannot come where I'm going. Well, where is he going? Right? Heaven, going back to God. He says, you cannot come. You'll die in your sins. Very pointed statement. Why does he say that so severe to them? Because he knows they're never going to change. Right? They're never going to accept him. They're never going to take him for what he is, for who he is. And so we have this huge conversation. Surely he will kill himself. Since he says, where I'm going, you cannot come. Does he mean he's going to kill himself? He was saying to them, you far from below, I am from above. You are of this world, I'm not of this world. Boy, this gets more and more confusing all the time, doesn't it? You are from below, I'm from above. What does that mean, do you think? What does that mean to them, not to us? What do you think that means to them? What's below and above at this time in history in Judaism? What's below? Huh? Yeah, right. Yeah, Hades, Sheol, right? Realm of the dead, right? What's above? God, heaven, right? He says, you're from below. You're from, right? Evil, dead, death, right? I'm from above. I'm from God. I came from there. Well, that's kind of hard to understand, right? I came from there. I came from above, right? I am from above. You're of this world. I'm not of this world. Therefore, I say to you, you will die in your sins, for unless you believe that I am he, you will die in your sins. Who are you? What have I been saying to you from the beginning? Who are you? Unless you believe I am he, well, who are you then? What have I been saying to you from the beginning? You know, it's interesting. Jesus really never says that I'm the Christ, does he? He never really says that, does he? And yet he says, what have I been telling you from the beginning? I don't know. It's pretty tough for me to wrap my head around some of that. He says, I have many things to speak and judge concerning you, but he who sent me is true, and the things which I heard from him, these I speak to the world. It's a very weird conversation. You got to admit. Why didn't he just tell them? Why all this shadow and smoke and mirrors and confusion? Why didn't he just tell them? Why did he just say, I am the Christ, I am the Messiah, I'm the one you're waiting for? Don't think they would have believed him? Well, he was definitely messing up their lifestyle. So if he would have said, I'm him, then what would have happened, do you think? If he would have, yeah, blasphemy, might have killed him right there, right? Might have took him, tried to force him to be something that he wasn't ever meant to be the king, be whatever, right? Do you think Jesus, do you think that he ever really wanted to reveal himself to the Jews? I mean, do you think he ever really wanted to tell them? I think it just would have went wrong, don't you? I think if he would have just come out and said, I'm the guy, right? I'm him, I think it just would have went all wrong. I think that, yeah. Well, a lot of them were running around doing it. No. So we had this game going on. I call it a game. Smoke and mirrors, shadows, illusion. Well, I'm him. Are you? Really? I don't know. You know? I mean, it's pretty confusing. You got to put yourself in their situation, right? Look at it through their eyes. Who is this guy that's saying all this stuff? Is he him? Is he not him? If it is him, what are we supposed to do about it, right? Well, yeah, he wanted him to come to that conclusion. That's exactly what he told Peter, you know. Yeah, he wanted him to. Yeah, he wanted them to know what they knew in their heart, that it really was him. But they didn't want to listen to their heart. They wanted to, because he wasn't what they thought he should be. It's just a very, very confusing part of the life of Jesus, you know. So, yeah. Anyway, thanks for your time this morning.